Everyone, welcome back to Something Genuine. I am Tweak, your host as always, and I'm grateful that you're spending some time with us today. If you're new to the series, Something Genuine is about having real conversations with people connected to anime, fandom, creativity, storytelling, all sorts of things that are connected to what we do at Beneath the Tangles. Um, our goal is to move beyond labels, move beyond our maybe preconceptions about people, and get to really know them and their stories. So, today's guest, I'm really excited to have on. I've known about him for a number of years. He is a journalist, an editor, an author, an educator. You may have read his work in New York Times, Kotaku, Men's Health, The Atlantic, or any of a number of other places, including Lifehacker, where he is the editor in chief. Or like me, you may know him best through his 2002 memoir, Piccolo Is Black, a memoir of race, religion, and pop culture, which basically explores a childhood that's been shaped by pop culture, being a Black person attending primarily white schools, being deeply religious in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. And again, it's all through the lens of pop culture, anime, all sorts of stuff like that. So this was a book that was profoundly impactful for me. So I'm really excited to talk to Jordan today about identity, religion, representation, and the stories that shape us as people. So without further ado, welcome to Jordan Calhoun. Hey, Jordan, I am so glad to have you here today.
Charles, thanks so much for having me. I love talking about this book, and it's been a while. I haven't done it in. I'm going to be out of practice. This is going to be a very genuine, candid interview, given that the book came out 4 years ago, as we were talking about before we started recording.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is called Something Genuine, so I'm I'm really glad that we caught you 4 years later. Maybe not when you're trying to sell the book at the time, although I hope we can get you some sales this time around too. Um, I think. I think that a lot of people who are tuning in today, especially with that little bit of a distance from when the book came out in 2022, are not familiar with it. And so this is my review copy. So it looks better than this. It doesn't have this line on it. It'll be nice and beautiful when you have it in your hands, everybody. But can you just kind of tell us a little bit about your memoir here?
Absolutely. So the book is called Piccolo Is Black, a memoir of race, religion, and pop culture. And that subtitle was really important to me because it was me marrying the three most influential parts of my childhood as I identified them. There was the race aspect because I was born and raised in a predominantly Black city and then at some point was transferred to a predominantly white school. So having that experience was very defining for me, going from being surrounded by people who looked like me and shared the same cultural touch points to then being around a group of people for which I felt like the outsider, and I had to learn this whole new culture and this whole new language and a whole new way of navigating and being. So there was the race part of it. There was the religion part of it, which was I was born and raised a sixth generation Seventh Day Adventist. And I was, yeah, man, it runs deep in my family. So I was raised and indoctrinated very early in a very niche specific belief. And it was one where I felt one of the things in both Seventh Day Adventism and being a Black person or a person of color in a predominantly white space is that you learn to navigate from bubble to bubble. You learn to be a different version of yourself as a person based on whatever space you're in. And so when I was in the church, I was I was still myself, but I was a version of myself with a certain understanding and belief that everyone else in the church shared with me. And then when I was outside of the church and I was, out in the world with other people who had other beliefs and who didn't go to church on Saturday or who might not have believed in God at all or whatever their faith or lack of faith was, I was still myself, but I was a different version of myself. And there were things that were embarrassing about my religion or things that I wouldn't talk about, or I couldn't do things on Saturday because Seventh day Adventists believe it's the Sabbath and you couldn't, you can't work, you can't go shopping, you can't play sports, you can't spend money. Like all of those type of things made me feel really weird enough that I would, shrink that part of myself whenever I was outside of that bubble. And then the third part of the memoir is pop culture as again, another strong force that helped me understand myself and helped me understand my identity. So the book was meant to be a convergence of those three things: race, religion, and pop culture, with my life as the through line. and it initially wasn't intended to be that way as a book. Some sort of insider baseball or back context of the process of writing this book was initially it was going to be far more emotionally detached, and it was going to be a more it was going to be more of an analysis of pop culture and race and black coding and queer coding and just racial coding in general, and how and why that happened. What was the history of animation and entertainment that set the breeding ground for people who were in the 80s and 90s experiencing such a lack of representation that we all built the skill of being able to find ourselves in characters, even if that character wasn't explicitly representing our race or our mental status or ability or sexuality or anything like that. We all got really good at it.
Mhm.
Why did we get really good at it? Why was that this universal unnamed phenomenon? So it was meant to be more of an academic detached analysis of it. And over time, what I learned in conversations with my publisher and other trusted friends and writers was that they were telling me that the most important part of it was me and how I felt experiencing those things, how
Mhm.
I felt navigating those spaces. And so I was convinced to be the anchor of the book and to talk about those things through the lens of how they affected a real person.
Mhm.
And I went into it when I decided to write it as a memoir. I went into it with the ethos of I'm going to have truth be my North Star, no matter how weird I look, no matter how good or bad I look, no matter how good or bad anyone else looks. I'm just going to write this as honestly as possible with the belief that the more vulnerable I am, it's sort of counterintuitive, but the more vulnerable I am, the more relatable I will be. Everyone feels, I think, opposite of that. Everyone feels that if you write something broadly or if you talk about something more broadly, then you capture a broader audience because more people will be able to relate to that thing. If you talk about something in a broad way as opposed to being very niche and very specific and very vulnerable. But I found the opposite to be true. I'd been told it, I'd understood it sort of on an intellectual level, but this was me experiencing it on an experiential level. That if I talk about how weird my life was and how weird I felt and the emotions and the thoughts that I were having, the more likely it is for someone like you, Charles, or someone who's reading the book to say, like, oh, wow, you put to words something that I have also felt or something that I've also experienced. And so that's the gist of the book. It's discussing feeling like an outsider. It's discussing finding your own identity and finding your own sense of self and doing it through a lot of the entertainment that was often at the time thought of as frivolous and junk food and just, not really important, and just how untrue that was, just how powerful entertainment played, how powerful a role entertainment played in forming our identities and who we are.
That's great. I told you a little bit before we got on too about how my experience was very reading this book is very similar to the experience that other readers have had about. Yeah, I was able to feel it a very personal story to me, even though our experiences are entirely different. My religion growing up was different. Our races are different. Geographically, all those things were different. There are these touch points, right, with just being a child of the 80s and 90s, right? Oh, and in that sense, those things were really interesting to me and fun to read. It was there was a little bit of a Ready Player One quality in my mind reading. Oh yeah, that's cool, that's cool, that's cool. But as I was reading, I was making my own connections, right? Like oh, but this was the movie that made me feel this way, or this reminds me of this, or this religious experience reminds me of this. And a lot of times, I'm glad you were vulnerable because the embarrassing stuff you put in there sometimes is stuff I would never want to write, and share with the world. I'm glad you did because it reminded me of sometimes not the best memories, but important ones, right? To say, oh,
Right.
this is kind of how I processed things at the time. And now looking back, I can process some more and realize what kind of impact that had on me, which helps me maybe live better today. And I wonder, like along those lines, the we you mentioned representation already. We've got the title of the book is a good example of what we're kind of talking about here. But I can't remember if you mentioned this in the book or not, but was there maybe not, but when did you kind of start understanding the lack of representation in the pop culture and in media when you were growing up? Was it when you were like growing up, or was it way later?
Implicitly as a child, but not in any type of way that I would have been able to express or articulate. Explicitly, I didn't realize it until I was an adult. It wasn't until far later that I understood what I was doing. And what I was doing was adapting to that lack of representation. There was so little Black representation, and so much of the Black representation that did exist was trash. And I came to realize at some point when I would talk to certain friends who'd be like, oh, yeah, Panthro was Black, or oh, yeah, this character is Black, that character is Black, that we all had the same skill set. We all came to the same consensus without ever deliberating, without ever having a conversation prior to be like, all right, these are the criteria by which we would assign a race to this character. It happened on its own. And so that was when I started getting the understanding as an adult of what was done. But as a kid, I didn't realize that representation was poor or that representation was scarce. As a kid, you just want to find a character that resonates with you. As a kid, you just want to find a character who you can say when you're on the playground and you're playing X-Men or whatever, like I'm that character. I am this person right now. You just want to have something that represents you, and that was a direct byproduct of the lack of representation. Even though we didn't have vocabulary or the intellectual understanding for it.
Yeah, we needed people to kind of establish that framework for us to understand that later on. Okay, you
Oh
know,
yeah, I love this character so much because they are the token Black character
you're right.
that makes me feel seen or that represents me in a way that I would like to be represented.
I'm wondering. You mentioned like some of the representation of Black people was trash in your words back then. Are looking back on some of these shows you watched or enjoyed in your youth or video games or whatever. I guess kind of a two-part question. Are there some that you look back on and think you were hmm, were there Black people in media back then that you were just watching and absorbing, but now you're like, oh, that was a really poor representation, and you don't look back as much with fondness? And also, are there things you look back on now with more fondness, having kind of processed it a little bit better as an adult?
I'll answer the first question first, and that is the answer to that is similar to how I mentioned implicitly we had a certain understanding as kids, but it didn't become explicit or sort of front of mind or more cerebral until we became adults. The same was true when it came to recognizing poor representation of Black people. I wouldn't see, Mr. Popo in Dragon Ball Z as a kid and be like, oh, that is a racist depiction based on the Sambo caricature from, like, that's not how we thought about it as kids. We just instead implicitly disregarded the characters that we thought were bad or that didn't represent us in a way that made us feel strong or smart or powerful or heroic. And then we latched ourselves on to the other characters. And it's most interesting to me when it would happen within a single show. So using Mr. Popo for an example, like, or using Dragon Ball for an example, like Dragon Ball Z has a couple like Black depictions, Mr. Popo being one of them. No one attaches themselves to those characters. Instead, we found the other character that we feel represents us in a way that we want to feel represented or that does make us feel strong or noble or heroic or whatever. And then we said, that's our character. That's the one that we wanted. By doing that, it shows a recognition that like we get that Mr. Popo isn't a good representation of us. We don't understand it, intellectually, but that's no one's favorite character. And that would apply across the board with any type of racially coded character or explicitly Black character that sucked. Like the one of the ways, probably the easiest way to tell if a character is a poor depiction of or a poor representation of your race is it's no one's favorite character. No one's like Jar Jar Binks is my favorite Star Wars character. No one's like Jinx is my favorite Pokemon. Like no one has that as a favorite. We just sort of disregard them. Later on, as we're an adult, as the other part of your question, like later on when we're an adult, we can think about it more intellectually and you know make it more academic and point out what we didn't like. But as kids, the way that we adapted to it was ignoring it and just finding the thing that we did like and attaching ourselves to that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to continue the discussion of pop culture, but I also want to jump into religion, and we've been talking about race too. And they all these pieces, obviously
If
they
I did
all.
my job well, they all are intertwined and enmeshed in a way that it's really hard to talk about them completely in isolation, but it is definitely possible. I'm happy to do it.
Well, we'll try. We're going to talk about it all anyway. So this is going to be an exaggeration, but I got the sense that I mean, through most of the book, it definitely felt like the Seventh Day Adventist background was almost antagonistic to you. Was kind of was pulling you down in a sense, and that pop culture was generally more of a positive force. Now, there's a lot of nuance, of course, in there. Um, would you looking back now, because the spoiler alert, the memoir doesn't end with you going all the way into your 20s and 30s and into adulthood. Looking back now, do you feel that the church was abusive, or it was a traumatic experience for you?
Yes, I would say pretty firmly now, I would call it traumatic and I would identify it as religious trauma in a
Mm-hmm.
way that I might not have if we had this conversation 10 years ago,
Okay.
or maybe even 5 years ago. I don't know if I had the language to call it religious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Now, today, in 2026, I would definitely call it religious trauma, and I would point to the church as being a very, specifically the Seventh Day Adventist Church, being a very high control religion
Mm-hmm.
that has a lot of beliefs and a culture, so practices that are both official and unofficial, that make it very, very difficult for a child to survive and feel happy and healthy. It is very damaging to a developing brain and to someone who doesn't have the intellectual capacity to understand all of its rules and its logic and its beliefs and its practices. So it was really, really difficult, and pop culture was a refuge from that. It was an escape from it. If I'm watching a show and I'm in a world where, you know, I'm in a world that has completely different rules for who makes someone a good guy or a bad guy, that was freeing from the world I lived in, where the belief structure that I was raised in often said that I was a bad person, and that often said that people I cared about were bad people, and that we were inherently flawed and we were inherently sinful, and it was only by the grace of God that we would be saved. And if not for that grace, and if not for that belief in God, then there's no reason to live, and that it's impossible to have a meaningful and fulfilling life without that foundation and without that belief in God. And that a separation from that God would be the worst thing possible. And because you would be living that meaninglessness, that lack of purpose. It's really hard to wrap your mind around all of those things as a kid and not feel consistently judged and consistently surveilled by this being that knows your every thought and your every action. And specific to Seventh day Adventist belief is that all of those thoughts and actions, if you fail, if you end up not going to heaven, it will all be revealed to your loved ones who did make it to heaven. And so there's this fear that anything that I did or anything that I thought would eventually, unless I was successfully, good enough and trusted enough and had strong enough faith to make it to heaven, that anything that I did negatively would be found out by all. It would be seen by you, it would be seen by my mother, it would be seen by my brother and sister, it would be seen by everyone who made it to heaven to see why I deserved my damnation. There's a lot of specific beliefs in the Seventh Day Adventist Church that I think are really difficult to cope with as an adult, let alone as a child.
Yeah, it's I definitely get you there. It's and this what you're talking about runs through the whole book. You're frequently you're talking about what you're thinking in your mind, and it's a lot of this, the guilt you have, the guilt you're carrying. Are people going to find out, or when they do find out you did something, or you got in trouble at school, or you're watching something on TV that you're not supposed to, that immense guilt that you felt. And also I would think that uh, that conflict, right? Because you're enjoying this. This is something that's bringing you joy, where watching some series or something, but you're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to do that, and then you didn't. I don't know the Seventh Day Adventists super well. I have a couple of friends that are that faith, but I don't know if the structure is in place. Certainly not for you growing up to kind of live through that, understand it, kind of grow through it, and not carry this kind of guilt at such a young age, and just keep carrying it, and not get the chance to really throw some of that off, or get the grace, right? that the faith is talking about.
The guilt, I'm glad you mentioned guilt, and I know you're probably going to ask a question in a second, but I just want to touch on this very briefly, which is
Please,
that the guilt, I'm glad you mentioned guilt because it is such an ongoing theme in the book. Probably, I don't know if I ever, the way that I wrote the book was specifically from the perspective, like you'd mentioned, of what I was thinking and feeling at the time at whatever age I was.
mm-hmm.
So I tried to do that the whole time
Mm-hmm.
I'm writing the book. Is this is what happened, and this was what my experience was like, and this is what I felt about it, this is what I thought about it at that age. I try to stay in that time period as opposed to my adult understanding that can analyze it better, that could understand more holistically what was happening for me at that time. And so, since I was trying to describe what I felt at that age, I'm glad that you and hopefully other readers caught on that sense of guilt. And what that evolves to is shame when when it accumulates. Guilt is a feeling of I did something wrong, but when you do that enough, it becomes I am something wrong. It goes from I did something wrong or I feel bad about a thing to I am a bad person. And that accumulation is was a consequence of a lot of how I was raised and what I was taught, and the times where I felt a reprieve from that guilt and that shame was through, being able to sit in front of the TV, enjoy the thing that I was enjoying, whether it was this TV show or that movie, but then afterwards, you're flooded with that sense of guilt or shame because you weren't supposed to be watching that TV show or that movie. Same thing with masturbation comes up in the book. It's like you can feel good at the time, and then once it wears off,
Mm-hmm.
then you feel this immense sense of guilt or shame afterwards. And it was just a cycle in my childhood of finding something that can feel good and make me happy or entertained, and then having a crash afterwards where you feel a lot of guilt and shame, and then going back to something that feels good and having that cycle continue, which is incredibly difficult as a kid.
The one thing I thought after I put down the book when I originally read it was, or one thing I wondered, um, was how once you eventually separated yourself from the church, how did your mom feel? How was your family with that?
Yeah, so now we have progressed past probably the scope of the book, and we're
Yeah.
talking about things that I'm currently writing about in my
Mm.
second book. This is my first
Oh,
time
okay.
actually even mentioning this publicly.
Oh,
So, Charles, you're
all right. We
you get an
we broke
exclusive on
news
this
here.
one. We're breaking news here. So, working on a second book that's about exactly that. It's about deconstruction and what emotions and work and toil goes into if you were raised with a certain belief system that was so foundational to your sense of being, what does it mean to deconstruct that and take it apart and try to rebuild your sense of self to with something that you think is better? How do you rebuild a belief system or a moral system or your ethics or your values in a way that are mine as opposed to what the Seventh Day Adventist Church taught me? And it's really, really challenging to do. I only recently, and by recently I mean since Piccolo Is Black came out, started having conversations with my family about religion and about my belief or lack of belief. And that came as a direct result of the book. None of these conversations happened prior to the book. I was often found in a situation prior to the book where someone could say something to me, a family member who is still deeply entrenched in Seventh day Adventist belief, might say something that I think is bigoted or unethical or immoral. And I would put myself in or I would be in the situation that felt like such a lose lose. It was one of two things. I would either have door A, which was me speaking up that I do not agree with that belief, or door B, where I keep the peace and I keep my mouth shut. And whatever door I felt, there felt like a consequence that I wasn't willing to accept. If I went through door one and spoke up against that belief, then I would be outing myself as someone who had left this faith that has so defined myself and my family for 6 generations. And if I keep my mouth shut, then I feel like a coward. I feel like I didn't defend what I believe in. I feel like a failure of a person, sort of, when it comes to morally and just having a general spine to stand up to what you believed in. So I hated being in that position so much that I generally avoided family for a long period of time. I wrote about this once or twice in The Atlantic, where I talked about why I would always leave the country for Thanksgiving and Christmas. Like, I would always be on a trip and avoid family situations because I hated so much being put in that situation where someone from my family might say, like, someone once said, we were at a diner at my grad school graduation, and someone in my family was talking about how Hurricane Sandy happened in New York because the gays filled the cup of iniquity and this was God's vengeance and judgment. And I sat there and I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to out myself as having left that faith and that I don't believe that anymore. And I feel like shit about that to this day, like that I
Well, it's all that trauma back again, right? Because it's like, yeah, I get that. I feel, and now I feel the shame of not speaking up for something, you know?
exactly, and it's such a bad position to be in, and so I would avoid those situations altogether. It was only through writing and processing a lot of this emotion through writing the book and a whole lot of therapy that I got to the point where I am now far more comfortable in having these conversations with my family, and their reactions to it vary. A lot of this is going to be processed in the
Don't,
book that I'm writing right
yeah,
now, but
don't give any
those
spoilers.
reactions, I mean, the reactions are probably what you can imagine or what you can expect. Like, I think the most common reaction for people who were raised, not necessarily even Seventh day Adventists, but just Christian in general, is that so many of our stories are about people who had doubt of their faith and eventually changed their mind. And so I think if my family is being optimistic, which most likely or most often they are when talking to someone who was a stray sheep from Jesus's flock, they expect, and it's sort of patronizing, but they expect that, like, oh, you're just going through a phase. Like, you are the prodigal son, you leave and you will come back to us. You are, it doesn't matter if you're, uh, Saul was like the biggest persecutor of Christians, and then he became Paul. Like, so there are so many of our stories about people who, you know, doubted the faith or doubted God or, deconstructed in some way or left the flock, and they eventually came back. And so a lot of the experience that I'm having, not the full experience, I'll save that for the book, but a significant part of the experience is people just wanting to believe what they want to believe, which is that they raised you well enough that you will return and you will be saved and we'll all be around the tree of life in heaven, down by the river that flows by the heart of God.
I think that's really interesting. One thing that I've been kind of meditating on for a number of years now as a Christian is the idea that uh, when your faith is relatively, now I'm being patronizing, but simple, like, like if and this is how I was raised. I think it's how most people are raised that are in some sort of church, where you've got the structure and the stories, and the sermons could be from any of a number of churches, thousands across America, telling the same sort of thing. In fact, you'll hear the same messages over time. Oh, I heard that one a couple of years ago, or this pastor already went through this message. Oh, this is the fourth time I've gone through this passage. It's without the kind of complexities of letting actual life and experience enter into faith. You start. It's a way of keeping control. You know, we want to.
Yeah.
This is how the story is, and even things like. And I'm not going to talk specifically about your family because I don't obviously know them, but like the idea, like, oh, he'll come back, right? Well, that's control too. It's like, we did our part. We are faithful, and we love him, so we hope that he'll be part of this, rather than kind of maybe opening up your brain and heart a little bit and say, well, he's living this life, this journey, and we're on this journey, and like, what is happening, what are these dynamics here, and what's going on, and how can we care for him in the moment. And even from a Christian perspective, you could there's a more complex way of thinking about it, that it's not just about, oh, he's gone and now he's going to come back one day. Oh, he's the prodigal son, right? Well, maybe that story doesn't fit him, right? And maybe he never comes back. And what if he doesn't? What does that mean for my faith, right?
And
How am I
that
going to process this?
this is where I would speak specifically to Seventh Day Adventist belief and culture, because that is a difficult mental. I know what my, you know, mother or father feel, or my grandparents would feel, or my aunts or uncles feel when they get to that mental wall where they get to the junction where they're like, all right, what if he doesn't come back? Then he will be damned. And that is such a heavy thought that they don't want to go there. They don't want to entertain the idea that I couldn't come back, or that I would choose not to come back, because it's a horrible story. Then it's a nightmare. Then this person that they love, in the great controversy between God and Satan, chose Satan. This person chose Satan. We taught him, we loved him, we raised him, and he ended up on the enemy side. He ended up choosing Satan in the great controversy between good and evil, between God and his angels and Satan and his, and he will be damned for it, and he will cease to exist, and he will have deserved it. That's such an ungenerous and difficult thought to give to someone who you love the way that they love me. And so I find that there just becomes a mental block where they have to believe he'll come back. The same way that an athlete might think, you can be down 20, but you're like, we have to believe that we can come back, because the alternative, like, we don't want to start entertaining that idea, or else it'll become more likely to happen. We have to have faith. We have to have belief that this positive outcome could happen, because the alternative is really distressing.
And we, of course, we love those people in our lives who we feel maybe headed down that path, but there's also, I think, there is a selfish component too, in that, at least this was my experience when I was a adolescent and kind of struggling with questions of faith, and became agnostic and was kind of wondering where I was going and what I believed. Being confronted with the question of hell and how ungenerous that is, using your words, right? Like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to deal with that belief, because it's easy when I'm just talking about other people. I've never met the others, right? As we
Right.
all do in some form or fashion, sometimes much worse than others, but we do that, right? And it's like, oh yeah, that's what the church teaches, that's what scripture teaches, whatever. We can just like disconnect from that. But then connecting it to ourselves and to those closest to us, we'd rather not be maybe emotionally and intellectually honest. It's just, because
Mhm.
then maybe it's not just my loved one that's not in the faith anymore, maybe me. And if I'm being honest with everything and having to work with that, that's super uncomfortable. So I very much appreciate you writing a work that examines this faith from a very personal perspective, and because I think it kind of forces us who are readers who are still religious to confront that as well. And a lot of the Christian books I've read, or very few of them actually, when they do that, I often get the most out of them.
And I tried to, one of the very, very difficult, but I'll call it a silver lining in having written this book, is when I do have conversations with, let's say, my parents about this, one of the challenges that I have to their faith, and by challenge, I don't mean trying to change their mind or challenge their belief system, but one of the things that I want them to struggle with, one of the things I want them to grapple with is when they get to that wall where they go, oh, I believe that Jordan has to come back because if he doesn't come back, then he will deserve God's vengeance and God will destroy him. I want them to sit with that cognitive dissonance of them knowing that I am a good person, that I am a good person, that I do the things that I do, and I have the values that I have, and I try the way that I try, and that I will still be damned by their God. And I want them to sit with that cognitive dissonance, to sit with that difficulty of I love this person so much, but also this person can exercise vengeance and judgment against them and kill them. And I will call that God love, and I will also love my son. And those two facts exist at the same time. It is a very uncomfortable thing to sit with. And my existence and my story and my conversations with them force them to face that in a way that they more often than not try to avoid. They don't want to really engage in that thought because it's a very heavy thought to sit with. It's a very difficult cognitive dissonance to overcome. I love Jordan. I know he is a good person. I know he has values and he's doing this out of love. I love him. Also, my God will kill him. That is something that they will have to deal with. And I've gotten to the point where previously I would feel very bad about them having to deal with that feeling because I don't want my parents, I don't want my grandparents, I don't want them to grieve for me. I don't want them to worry about my soul. I don't want them. I hate being worried about. I don't want to be worried about or grieved over. But now I've gotten to the point where I have accepted that they are adults and it is coddling of me to worry about them in that way, and I have to let them grapple with it the way that they choose. They are choosing to believe that I am going to hell in this way, and they are choosing to love me, and these are all their decisions, their belief system and their love for me. If they come into conflict, that is their decision, and that's something that they need to come to terms with, and I don't need to coddle them. I don't need to protect them from that. If anything, they will be better served to the extent that they're willing to grapple with that contradiction.
No, I love that they're better served. I think, I mean, I haven't had to have that kind of same experience with family, but with a lot of friends who have kind of struggled with the same, whether with their family or just with their own personal faith. And I come away thinking, sometimes I come away with some sorrow, but I also come away thinking I'm glad that they're being honest about this and struggling with this, because the alternative is just putting that wall up, and you're not served best as a person, I don't think, by just putting these walls up, right? We have to keep processing, keep thinking, and make sure that what we believe in really is what we believe in, because then how are you living your life? You only have so much time on earth, right? So
Yep.
spend it well. This was a great conversation. I want to hit a couple happy points before we get off. I got a couple more questions for you. I wanted to. There were a bunch of places I marked in the book while I was going over it again, but I'm gonna read one just very short passage because I wanted to talk about this movie a little bit. Let's see. For those of you following, I'm on page 142, 143. Just a couple quick sentences. You write, "The Prince of Egypt was the biggest surprise of my childhood. It showed Black people at the forefront of it all." Can you tell us a little bit about your experience watching that movie? Because my experience.
Oh
My
man.
experience wasn't as personal because I didn't see race or anything while I was watching it. It didn't even occur. It was just like, oh, of course Ray finds and things of that nature. But I was blown away by the animation, which helped draw me to anime and animation later. Yours is a little bit different, a more personal connection.
The animation was gorgeous, the story was gorgeous, powerful, compelling, all that stuff, but all the characters were so easily black. Like you see Zipporah and she is dark skinned. You see Moses and he has melanin. All of these people are dark skinned, and it was the type of representation that you would not expect. I grew up on, I don't know, did you ever watch the Hanna Barbera stories from the
Oh yeah.
Bible growing
Oh
up?
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Margot,
Uh-huh.
Derek, and Moki? Like
Yeah.
you see Margot, Derek, and Moki's the one black character. And whenever they go travel back in time, anytime you see Bible stories, they're just all, they're just typical animated white people.
Mhm.
And Prince of Egypt all of a sudden is this beautiful story that has characters with melanin, and they're not just all white characters.
Mhm.
So just being able to see the most powerful story from the Bible, the story of Exodus, like one of the most, if not the, well, I guess Jesus' death would probably be the biggest, but one of the biggest
Right
stories.
there.
Yeah, one of the biggest stories. Let's say the biggest story in the Old Testament
Mhm.
with black characters
Mm.
was so compelling and powerful to me. And again, when you see a black character being heroic, being strong, being a leader, it makes you feel that way. It makes you feel capable of it. I didn't realize as a kid that this is, Michelle Pfeiffer as a voice actor, and this is Val Kilmer, and like all the voice actors were white. I didn't think about that. I just saw what I saw on screen and grasped onto it, and it was, it was amazing to me, especially as a kid who not only loved animation but who was deeply Christian. It was the perfect convergence of the religion and pop culture and race. Like it was those three things tied together. It satisfied every part of my identity that I was trying to reconcile. It had black characters. The race part was satisfied. It was a integral part of pop culture because the Prince of Egypt wasn't just big in Christian circles. It wasn't just big in Adventist circles. The Prince of Egypt was big, period, by a major studio. It was in movie theaters. So it satisfied the pop culture part, and it came from the Bible. Like it satisfied the religion part. So it was a perfect convergence of all three of those themes in a way that generally never happens. It is very, very rare that as a kid, at least, that those three things all came together and existed in a place where I felt so normal watching the Prince of Egypt. I felt so normal, and that was a rare feeling.
That's so awesome. I wish I had a moment like that when I was younger. Like I was trying to think, what was my moment? It was probably like Rush Hour, which is like there's no religious component in it, and it's just Jackie Chan making dumb jokes with Chris Tucker. But even in something dumb like that, right? Like
Yeah,
like me and three Korean guys went to go watch that movie, and it was like this is the first time like I ever felt like I belong somewhere. That was like that was for
yeah,
me,
yeah.
and
That
it's
sense
you
of
who was watching this.
when there's inside jokes and you are on the inside of that
Mhm.
joke, that feels
Mhm.
great. The version of that for the Prince of Egypt for me, it wasn't like being on the inside of the joke, but it was like I knew the story more than any any Christian who's watching the Prince of Egypt has a deeper understanding than someone who's got the broad strokes of it, but doesn't know you know what verse that is in the Bible or what book that is in the Bible. This was this was something that I had previously would have previously conceived as just being in my Christian Adventist bubble as a story that we all knew and care about. And then all of a sudden I'm outside of that bubble and everyone else is getting to know it too, and they're not looking at it weird. They're looking at it like this is an amazing movie. And Whitney Houston and Mariah Carey are singing on it. And all it was just like this just normalized thing with great music, as big as, with music as good as any Disney movie. It just felt it felt really good to have my it felt like it was so validating. It was so validating. It was so affirming in a way that made me absolutely love that movie so much.
Well, thank you, DreamWorks, for that. We appreciate it. It's a big moment.
Absolutely.
Is there those who will read the book will read about so many different pop culture moments, movies, things of that nature from the 80s and 90s. What are some properties or movies that you've loved since then, since this time, that stick with you and are important to you in the last decade or two?
The one that comes to mind first is Craig of the Creek. So I'll talk about that. Have you seen Craig of the Creek?
Mhm.
It's a cartoon that was on Cartoon Network with a little black protagonist named Craig, and he goes on adventures every day in the creek with all of his friends. It's very much like if you grew up watching Recess, it's very much Recess reincarnated, except instead of being on the playground, they are after school in the creek. And the instead of where Recess had Vince LaSalle, Recess is a good example of the common 1 to 4 or 1 to 5 ratio that was happening in the 80s and 90s when it came to representation. There would be a token of, there would be one token black person, there would be one token Asian sometimes, and then the rest would be white people. So there was, Vince LaSalle was the token black, and then he was surrounded by Gretchen Grundler, Griswold, TJ Detweiler, Mikey Blumberg, and then, there was Vince. Craig of the Creek was the same type of heart and friendship and camaraderie and adventures of kids of that age, but it was surrounded with a black boy and a black family and his diverse group of friends in the creek. And it's extremely well done. It's brilliantly written. It is funny, it's heartfelt, and it is for representation now what I was looking for as a kid, or what I would have loved so much as a kid. It would be I imagine, and I'm glad for any kid who's, 10 years old, who's watching something like Craig of the Creek when it was on. I'm glad for them in the way that they are getting what I wanted, and I'm so happy that they get to get that affirmation. And that's normal for them to watch Craig at the Creek. Whereas for me, we were trying to say that this anthropomorphic animal is black because we needed a black character to latch on to. So that's a good example for me of something that represents my hope and aspiration for the future, is like we get characters that get to show black people not as black coded or not an anthropomorphized dog or whatever, but as a black kid being a black kid with his like black family and his friends, and going on these adventures the way that white kids when I was growing up just got to be normalized and see themselves on screen and go on adventures. The
And with good
third,
storytelling, right? Like people that are invested in it and creative and doing creating something that's going to be classic, that
yeah,
because it's so
because
well
they
made.
love the characters. I think that's
Mhm.
something that really, really bleeds through, is when the writer loves the character, and when you love a character, you capture their whole humanity. You get to write them thoughtfully. You get to show the beauty and the challenges and the fun and the difficulties, and it's written out of love and passion and creativity. And I think that bleeds through. And I think the characters, whether they are explicitly black or black coded, those are the characters that I think we all generally gravitated to. It was like, yeah, that character is me, or that's the character that I love.
Great. I've got one final question. Um, if you, the Jordan Calhoun now, could tell younger Jordan, you can pick an age. It doesn't matter, wherever you feel like. If you could tell that Jordan one thing, what would you tell him?
Oh man, I would tell him you're a good person. You'll be all right. Like I think. going back to the theme that we talked about earlier in the show, that guilt and that shame, that it can be extremely overwhelming. And I would want younger me to know that someone sees you for your efforts and for your care and for the good things that you do, not to judge you, not to condemn you, not to make you a better person, but just to love you. Like, you are a good person, you are enough as you are. You don't have to accomplish this thing to do it. You don't have to like meet this standard or do these things to do it. You are inherently enough. It's something that I hope, 65-year-old Jordan comes back and tells me now. Like, it's something that I will consistently need to hear, is that I am enough and I have value as I am, and that I don't need to keep pushing and keep trying, that I can be a good person. I can be worthwhile. I can have value. And I don't have to live with the guilt and the shame and always have to be trying to outrun it by accomplishing more or doing better or being a better person. It's an exhausting, difficult way to live. And it's one that is very difficult to shed. I think shedding that is a lifelong journey for those of us who struggle with that feeling, but it is very worthwhile. And I would want, 10-year-old, 15-year-old, 20-year-old me to hear that.
Well, I'm very glad you were able to grow through that and become who you are now. Because if I hadn't read a lot of your articles and so forth before this book came out, I wonder I wonder how Jordan turns out. Because it's I don't know. So thank
Yep.
goodness things are going well for you. And yeah, we're always still growing. We're always still trying to throw that trauma off, process it, grow through it, and do our best. And everyone out there, make sure to pick it up. I'm not just blowing smoke. I'm saying this is such a powerful, moving book, and I think a lot of us right now are really around our age in our 30s and 40s are living in nostalgia, which is not always a great thing, but I think this is really going to speak to a lot of you all and help you take that to a different level, a deeper level, and think about what you experienced in the past, what you're experiencing now, and how everything kind of jives. Race, religion, all these various life experiences. So this is going to be a good read for you. Where else can everyone find you, Jordan?
Everyone can find me. I am most often on Blue Sky and Threads and Instagram. I do have
Okay.
a Twitch and I do plan on streaming sometime soon, but that's going to be a little bit later. So my handle for Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram is all the same. It is my name, my middle initial, and my last name. So Jordan M as in Michael Calhoun. That's the easiest way to find me. And then if anything's related to sort of gaming pop cultures like Twitch and YouTube, that's my, or PlayStation or things like that. My tag on those is Paris Tokyo Ghoul, which is a portmanteau of Paris Tokyo, the Lupe Fiasco song, and Tokyo Ghoul, the anime. So Paris Tokyo Ghoul on certain platforms. But
Tokyo
Jordan
Ghoul.
M. Calhoun will find me most places. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
we'll
Tokyo Ghoul.
drop all those links down here, so you don't have to remember it. You just click on it and follow Jordan. Jordan, thank you so much for being on today. It was such a great conversation.
Thank
I
you,
appreciate it.
Charles. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for the kindness. It's been really, really great to revisit this work and to talk about it. I love this conversation with you. So thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. And thank all of you out there for watching it. And I hope it gave you some food for thought and will help you as well. So take care, everyone. We will see y'all later. That was great, wasn't it? Jordan is so terrific, so intelligent, so compassionate, um, terrific person. Um, there are so many things we could touch on here, right? But I want to talk a little bit about that religious trauma and the impact it has on you. Maybe that's you, who went through something where you feel a lot of guilt or trauma or shame from the church. Um, Thankfully, I felt a little bit of that growing up, and I think that's that probably poor teaching that's going on where people are trying to transmit ideas of sin and grace and salvation, and maybe wrongly. Maybe it's in a way that is just wrong. Again, I don't know a lot about the Seventh-day Adventist religion, but I had a discussion once with a close friend, and I was like, I don't think I jive with that with what you believe. But even like if I did, if it was just kind of Orthodox Christianity, um, there are still ways that that's taught that could be very harmful. And ultimately, I think that has to do with our hearts. It has to do with leadership and discipleship in the church. Because if we're raising the next generation, we want to raise them properly in the church. We can't raise them to feel like one day they're going to throw this off because of all the shame they feel from it. Jesus is supposed to free you, right? We talked a little bit about being free. Um, so if that's you, I hope you'll reach out to us and we can talk a little bit. Not that I'm better at any of this than what maybe Jordan experienced growing up. And it's interesting, I think also him talking with his family, and he's working on a work now, right? That he mentioned about how that's been going on. It's easy to shy away from these big discussions, these things that make us really uncomfortable. But at least for me, I've been going through the things in my faith, and there's a term for it, and it's not deconstruction. But I've been going through the things in my faith that are uncomfortable, where I'm like, is that really the character of God? And I've experienced enough, and I've read enough of the Bible that I trust Him. And that's sometimes the answer I have to get to. Like, I don't know what I feel about this, or I don't feel good about it, but I trust God with it. But if I'm not confronting it, I think I'm sinning. I think I'm not like saying I have faith. Let's explore this, you know. But there are some things that when you're 5 years old, 10, even 15, you're not ready for. Even 44 years old, you're not maybe ready for. Although you should be ready by this point, maybe if you've been in the church and been of the faith long enough. So anyway, that's just a little bit about faith. There's so much else in that conversation. I hope you listen to it all, and I do really hope you buy this book. It's a really terrific book. I learned a ton from it about myself, and I think that says something about the quality of it. So thank you all for joining us today, and we will see you all next time. God bless. Take care.